Hi there. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Tara Hawley and I'm the Scholarships Manager here at the Fulbright Commission. Today I just wanted to run you through some of the opportunities that we have available for Australian applicants and then show you how to apply, how to navigate the website, and just kind of cover some of those basics to get you started. So to jump straight in, the Australian American Fulbright Commission has been in Australia for 70 years now, and we promote educational and cultural exchange between Australia and the United States with the goal to enhance mutual understanding and strengthen relations between the two countries. As a leading scholarship program between Australia and the United States, the Fulbright name is synonymous with academic excellence, thought leadership, and mutual understanding, and reflects the uniquely deep bilateral relationship between the two countries. Now, as I said, this is now the 70th year of the Fulbright program here in Australia. Now, this was actually the first treaty between Australia and the US, so it predates ANZUS, and it was the idea of the Fulbright program was quite audacious in that a young senator by the name of J. William Fulbright had the idea after World War II that he just had this thought, that if people understood each other a little bit better, but not just through letters or through the media, but actually spent time with each other in person, significant amounts of time, just not only on academic, but also to understand each other's culture. He just thought if people just knew each other a little bit better and could humanize each other and see each other face to face, that things like World War II would never happen again. So J. William Fulbright waltzed into the US government and proposed, how about we sell off surplus World War II materials and use that money to fund two-way academic exchanges to the US, which at the time was quite an extreme idea in that just coming off of World War II and you'd think that was a time where the country would be looking quite inward. But this young senator thought that the best thing to do was to start looking outward. Now, that was obviously approved, and I think that it has now become bigger than he possibly could have ever imagined, in that it now runs between the US and about 160 countries. So the Australian office is just one of 160 that coordinate these exchanges between their home country and the United States. Now, here in Australia, we've sent over 5,000, we now have over 5,000 alum, including Australians and Americans, and the program here was established in 1949. And I think that history is important to cover because it not only plays a part in kind of why we exist, but it characterizes some of the things that we're looking for in our applicants. So those that are not only interested in having an academic or educational exchange, but people who are willing to be ambassadors for their own home country and really throw themselves into that cultural exchange as well. Now, over the last 70 years, we've been very proud to keep growing and to make the program bigger and have more opportunities available. So this year we have up to 100 opportunities available, which is more than we've had ever in any other year. So last year we were able to double our offering, and this year we have expanded it even more. So in terms of great times to apply, 2019 is a tremendous time to apply because not only do we have more awards, but we have a bigger variety of awards across the different categories. And the great thing about the Fulbright program is that you don't need to submit a different application for each award that you want to apply for. The Fulbright application you can submit, and then you can note in it each of the different awards that you would like to be considered for. So for example, you could be considered for 6 or 7 specific awards within one application, and because there are multiples of each award available, you could be considered for 20 or 30 awards just within the submission of one application. What I will mention is that there are 2 application portals. So one application is just for postgraduates, which I'll talk about a little bit more soon after this slide. So that's both postgraduates seeking to undertake study, so whether that's part of your Australian Masters Abroad or a full Masters, or that's PhD research, either part of your Australian PhD or a full PhD. So that's one application. So just make sure when you're looking at instructions and different pages that you're ensuring that you're completing the right application. Each year there's at least one person who unfortunately completes the wrong application, and it's really tricky for us to try and move the information across, and sometimes we can't do it. So really just make sure you're looking at the right pages. The second application is for what we call our scholar application. So we've got our postgraduates and our scholars, and the scholar portal an application covers our postdoctoral awards. Now, these are for people who have completed their PhD within the last 5 years. So that's 5 years from when it was conferred. And the award is available for people to undertake postdoctoral research in the US for 3 to 10 months. Now, this can be in any field, it can be in any discipline, and it's up to the applicant to note in the application how many months they're seeking. So if you put in an application for 3 months, it means that we'll consider it for a 3-month program. So consider your timelines and how long you think that you'll need, and make sure when you're writing your application, you explain or I guess justify what it is that you'll be doing for the amount of time that you're proposing. Now, there are a whole range of different awards under the postdoctoral scholarship. So when I show you the website, we can have a little bit of a look at them, but it's kind of split into a couple of categories for us. So there are a range of awards across each of these categories, except for the distinguished chair. So the 3 categories at the top there, that are funded by the Fulbright Commission. And when I say that, it means that it's funded from our Australian government and US government funding, and it can be in any field, any discipline, and each year it varies, but there are likely to be 4 or 5 each year that come out of that category. So say, for example, if you were submitting a postdoctoral application, you would apply, first and foremost, you are considered in that general category. So straight off the bat, you're considered for those general awards. Then within your application, you elect to be considered for additional awards. So when you look through the website, you can search just for, say, for example, postdoctoral, and you'll see a whole range of awards come up. Now, some of them are sponsored, which means that they're funded by an outside institution. And the difference between those and ours is not just the funding source, but for example, we have an award, a postdoctoral scholarship, which is funded by RMIT University. And it just means that they're looking for individuals that may perhaps be in a certain field or discipline. So the best thing to do is to not only have a look at just the general pages, but click through each of the different awards and see if your project, it meets with what they're looking for. Now, the best thing to do is to be considered for as many awards as possible. And for us, it doesn't dilute the application to note that you think that you know that you would be suitable for each of the different awards. That really helps us in our selection process. So make sure you click through each of the different awards that come under postdoctoral scholarships. And then on your application, you can note which ones that you're looking to be considered for. Now, next, we have our Scholar Awards. So these suit 2 different types of applicants. Firstly, it's for academics at either associate professor or full professor level who are seeking to do research in the US. But then it's also for mid-career professionals who have an undergraduate qualification and at least 10 years relevant work experience. Now, for our professionals, they may want to go to, again, undertake research for 3 to 4 months, but they may also want to do some sort of professional development training in the US. So it's open to both of those type of applicants. Now, again, with the Scholar Awards, we have our general Scholar Award funding. So that covers 5 or 6 awards each year. But then we have a range of other awards that are open to professionals and academics. Now, this one, it's best to not only look at, say, if you are an academic, it's helpful to look at the ones that seem academic from the outset. So that's all of the ones that are called Fulbright Scholar Award. And then it may at the end say funded by CQU University, or it could say funded by a different organization. But also take a look at the awards that are called Fulbright Professional Scholarships. So these could be for individuals in vocational education and training, in the non-for-profit sector, those that are focusing on or whose research looks at the US-Australia relationship and more. So make sure you take a look at the broad spectrum of the awards available, because both professionals and academics will it's certainly possible to sort of pick and choose across the Scholar Awards and the Professional Awards in the same application. They are looking for the same sorts of people, just depends on what your focus is. So again, the general awards are open to any field or discipline, and then it's up to you to ascertain whether some of the additional awards that are funded by outside organizations with us would be suitable for you. Now, the last scholarship type that is listed there is our Fulbright Distinguished Chair Scholarship. Now, at this point in time, we only have one Distinguished Chair Award, which is one that focuses on agriculture and life sciences and is funded by Kansas State University, which means that they are looking for a full professor who's interested in spending 5 to 6 months to come to Kansas State University and complete their research there. So that's specifically for someone who is not only in that field, but also has an interest in coming to Kansas State. Now, with the Distinguished Chair Scholarship, what would happen is you would apply for under the Scholar Award category, so you're automatically considered for the general awards there. And then if you sit within the agriculture life sciences field, you would note on your application that you would like to additionally be considered for the Distinguished Chair Scholarship. Now, you would need your host to be Kansas State University, so that's something to consider in your application. But this is a tremendous award. Not only is it very generous, but it also includes great opportunities to do lecture series and conference travel across the country. And Kansas State University are a very supportive host. Now, speaking of hosts, you might think, well, how do I work out where I want to go? And this advice is really just for our postdocs, Scholar Awards, and PhD researchers. Now, with a Fulbright Award, you would need to be in contact or confirm a host. So that means that you need a letter of invitation from a proposed host in the US, and that has to be included with your application. That does mean that you need to reach out to people to make that connection and have them invite you so that you can include that letter. Now, we don't link applicants with potential hosts, but at times we have linked potential applicants with those, with some of our alum that are in similar fields to try and get some advice. But I'd really suggest, for example, if you're a PhD researcher, my best advice would be to talk to your PhD supervisor and ask if they have any connections already in the US, which would be a good starting point. Often that automatically starts getting the ball rolling because PhD supervisors often already have at least a connection to start with in the US. For those at Scholar Award or professional level, if you don't already have a connection and people around you don't already have someone to link you with, my suggestion would be to look for leaders within your particular field and reach out. Now, while Fulbright is fairly popular in Australia and it's a scheme that's pretty well known, it's exceptionally well known in the United States, being that they have people coming from 160 different countries each year, and their American scholars going to 160 other countries each year. It's just such a larger program in the US. So to say that you're applying for a Fulbright scholarship and you'd be interested in building a collaboration, it really does start to open that door. So certainly recommend doing that quite early, because often sometimes your project may change slightly or grow slightly depending on who you're looking to work with. Now, back to our Fulbright postgraduate scholarships. Now, as I said, postgraduate is an umbrella term that covers quite a few different types of applicants. So this could be for someone who is enrolled in a master's program in Australia, but they would like to complete a semester or two of that program in the US. Now, if you want to, it's essentially like an exchange program. Now, if you wanted to do that, you would not need to have confirmed a US host institution at the time of application. And this is the same for the second point there. So the first type is for people enrolled in an Australian master's wanting to complete a semester or two in the US. The second type is a student who wants to complete a full American postgraduate program, like a master's degree. So they want to go and do a full program rather than part of it, which they hope to get credited back in Australia. Now, for both of those, whilst of course it's great to look into the types of institutions that you would like to complete your study at, we ask that you do not apply at any of those institutions before submitting your Fulbright application and finding out the outcome. And the reason for that is that we work with placement services in the US, and what they do is they work one-on-one with our successful candidates to not only complete their applications for colleges, but it also means that they can negotiate tuition fees and all sorts of other things that make it a lot easier for candidates. So if you were filling in your application and you really had your heart set on one institution and you wanted to talk about why that particular institution, that's fine. As long as you keep an open mind in that if you have your heart set on one institution, but say, for example, unfortunately, you were not successful in obtaining admission to that institution, you still want your program to be feasible at another institution. So if you wanted to do law and you wanted to do it at Columbia, but you weren't successful there, as long as it can still translate to another institution, that would be completely fine. So our advice is to not have your heart too set on one particular institution, just in case. It's just simply not possible in that if you weren't successful, or if another program was recommended to you by placement services who are the experts, they might say, look, your area is human rights and this other institution really specializes in that, so we'd suggest that you also submit an application there as well. So just keep in mind, if you wanted to complete coursework, you do not need a letter of invitation with your application. In fact, we recommend that you do not apply for any institution until you find out the outcome of your Fulbright. And again, it does help with your college applications in the US to have confirmation that you have been successful at the time of applying. That can be really helpful as well. So coursework students do not need to have confirmed host and do not need a letter of invitation with their application. However, if you are enrolled in an Australian PhD program and you wanted to go and spend a part of your time in the US to complete research, you'd be going as a visiting student researcher and you would need a letter of invitation. So coursework, no host letter required, but researchers, you always need a letter of invitation. Now, what is not reflected on this slide is we're happy for applicants for both those that are enrolled in an Australian PhD who wanted to go to the US for a period of time, and that period of time is 3 to 10 months. But we're also really happy to receive applications from people who wanted to complete a full American PhD program. So that means they're not currently enrolled in one in Australia, but would like to be enrolled in one in the US. Now, the difference between the two is that the funding is still only available in the general pool of funding for 3 to 10 months. However, when we start talking about the Fulbright Futures scholarships, the funding is available for the whole PhD program. So what you would do is you'd apply in the general category, you would elect to be considered for the Fulbright Futures program, and then you would either receive confirmed funding for the first 3 to 10 months, or you could receive funding for the whole program. But don't let that worry you too much, because the best thing to do with these things is to get started and have at least your first year of funding confirmed, because it's so much easier to obtain funding for subsequent years. So now to talk about the Fulbright Future Scholarships. Now, this is a scheme that went live last year, and this is our most generous scholarship that we have ever had. In that, in previous years, tuition funding or visiting researcher fees that some institutions charge were not covered. And if they were covered in part, they certainly weren't fully covered. So the Fulbright Future Scholarships include a generous living stipend, travel fees. Some of the awards include funding for dependents, but the biggest and most exciting part of this scholarship is that it includes full tuition fees to be covered, as well as visiting researcher costs. So for example, if you were to go and do an MBA in the US and your tuition cost came to $50,000, they would be fully covered. So regardless of which institution, it's designed to be all-inclusive. Now, if you were going as a researcher, all of your researcher costs would be covered. In that, if an institution charges a visiting researcher fee, some do, some charge $0 per month, some charge a few $1,000s per month to be at their institution, those would be covered. Now, the great thing about these awards is they're not just for students, which is exciting, but they are for all categories. So if you are, again, a student wanting to complete part of a master's or wanting to go and complete a full US master's, if you are a PhD researcher wanting to do a little bit of research as part of your Australian program in the US, or if you wanted to go and do a full American PhD program, these awards are for you, but also our postdoctoral candidates, our scholar awards, and our professionals are all able to apply for this, so long as the research or study program is innovative and or has the potential for significant tangible impact. So with these scholarships to be included, you not only have to note on the application that you want to be considered for the Fulbright Future Scholarships, but as one of the additional documents to attach, we're looking for an impact statement. So what we would like to see and what we will assess applications on is, will this project or program, or does it have the potential to improve the lives, livelihoods, well-being, health of Australians? So we're looking at, you might go over and gain new skills, and when you come back, what could the impact be for Australians? So just ensure that when you're putting together your project statement, if, for example, if this was cancer research, or if this was about new technology, or if this was a business collaboration, as long as you can establish how that could potentially impact Australians upon your return, that is what we're looking for. Now, as a part of all of our Fulbright scholarships, we're looking for programs that will enhance the Australian-American bilateral collaboration. So yes, that impact statement will talk about how it could be beneficial to the lives of Australians, but also what we're looking for is what is the benefit between Australia and the US. And it could be something as simple as building linkages between the two countries, between your home institution and your host, or it could be something more substantial than that, but that's what we really look for. So across all of the scholarships, we're looking for what's the longer term impact and how is that going to impact the bilateral relationship? Because as we talked about in the history, that was the point of the program, is to build relationships between the two countries. So we like to look for that in applications to see, is this just a relationship that's going to last for the few months that the person is in the US, or is this something that really has the potential to be a longer term collaboration? So make sure you consider that, and certainly consider the Fulbright Future Scholarships. It's this initiative that has allowed us to grow so much over the last couple of years, and across each of the categories, there's anywhere from 15 to 20 awards available. So please make sure you take a look at this. It is incredibly generous, particularly for those who would like to go to institutions with high tuition or visiting researcher fees. It's just a wonderful thing that those will be fully covered, and just ensure that you include that impact statement to be included for that. Now, speaking of benefits, across the awards, this is what is generally included, and I haven't included specific amounts because they change depending on the award that you would be looking at, and there is a budget that's on our website which gives at least a general idea of what the funding looks like. So each one of our scholarships includes a monthly stipend, and this is paid into your account and can cover just general living expenses. So whether that's rent or groceries or travel to and from institutions or whatever you like, we transfer that to you with the expectation that it's used just to help you with just general day-to-day living costs. Each of the scholarships also includes a travel allowance, and that is for your international return flights to and from the US. Some of the scholarships include an establishment allowance, and that means that it's a payment upfront that kind of helps with those settling in costs, when it comes to paying a bond upfront or your first month of rent and setting up a phone, just some of those setup costs. Most of our scholarships include a dependent allowance. So this is a one-off payment, which is essentially designed to help offset some of the costs of flying your family over. Now, this is a question that we get pretty regularly, which is, how do we go about bringing our families? And so this dependent allowance is designed for that. What I will mention is that all Australian Fulbrighters would travel to the US on a J1 visa. And that is something that is sponsored by the Fulbright program. And the great thing about it is it not only allows the scholar to go to the US on that visa, but dependents, as in your spouse or your children, could enter the US on a J2 visa. And as part of the J2 visa, you could apply for working rights. So for example, if you were on a 10-month postdoctoral research scholarship and your spouse was with you, they could also apply for working rights as part of that J2, which means that they could also be, whether that's at a university or a different paid position, but it means that they could be working as well. As mentioned, our postgraduate awards either include partial or full tuition or visiting student researcher fees. So with the general postgraduate awards, so as in every other postgraduate award that is not the Fulbright Futures ones, they include a partial tuition allowance, which is generally up to $20,000 per year, whilst the Futures scholarships will cover the entire amount. And the general awards, if you are a researcher, will cover up to $2,000 of your visiting student researcher, so VSR fees. Again, not every institution will charge these, but for example, if you were at one that did, there is an allowance for that. And the Futures would, for example, cover any and all VSR fees. All scholars, regardless of category, receive ASPE health and accident cover. So it's a baseline health coverage which is available. And then we still recommend, though, that scholars supplement that with more comprehensive insurance. It's worth looking into the ASPE, but that's just a baseline coverage that's included. The best part about the Fulbright program is having access to established professional networks. So as mentioned in one of the first slides, we've sent and received 5,000 scholars over the years, and to be able to connect with people that, for example, if you lived in Sydney and you wanted to meet up with people that also are from Sydney who have been on the Fulbright program to pick their brain or to build links, we can introduce you to all of our scholars who live in Sydney. But what could even be more helpful is, say, for example, that your program was in Michigan and you were thinking, where am I going to live and how should I get started? We can introduce you to all of our Australian alumni who went on a Fulbright to Michigan, and in reverse, all of our alumni that live in Michigan, so our US alumni network as well. But not only that, our networks extend beyond that, and we're always very happy to introduce our scholars to all of our links as well. We run an orientation program in Canberra each year. So when we talk about the timeline, you'll see where that fits in. But also our colleagues in the US run their version of an orientation program, which is called an enrichment program. So that means, for example, if you were on your way to your Fulbright program, they may take you to a city close by, and it means that you would not only meet other Fulbrighters from Australia, but it means that you could meet Fulbrighters from each of the other 160 countries that may or may not be in your discipline. So it's a great way to network as well. And another helpful part is that our scholars receive extensive support from, particularly from the Commission. So we're with you not only just through the application process, but we walk you through step by step in the lead up to your departure to the US. So we do everything with you. We book your travel with you. We submit your visa paperwork for you. We answer all of your questions. We build your linkages. We're your biggest supporters. So you've always got someone to pick up the phone to a call or email, and providing great pastoral care to our scholars is it's one of the most important things that we do, and one of the parts that we enjoy the most. So you would not be alone. So not only with having a contact here in Australia, but again, our colleagues in the US, so we work with the International Institute of Education and with the US State Department. And so it means that on both sides, you have a great support network. Now, I might just click over to the timeline only because I mentioned it, and that is that applications are open from February to July each year. In 2019, we opened applications on the 4th of February, and they will close on the 15th of July. So that's a nice wide window for submitting your application. And the applications are not extensive. It's not like applying for an ARC grant. It's not a huge application to complete, but I suppose sometimes it's more difficult to be concise. So whilst actually I'll go over what's included in the application separately, but in terms of timeline, the applications would close on the 15th of July. Then we go through a whole range of processes here in our office, in that we first do a technical review. So we go through and we check that each application is eligible and complete. And once those applications have gone through that process, they are sent out to our discipline committee. So that means that someone within your discipline will be looking at your application. So for example, if you are in law, our discipline committee in law will take a look at it, and they give us feedback on whether the program is, whether it's a strong application, whether it's feasible, whether it's relevant to the discipline, and all of those sorts of things. And then those who make it through the discipline committee round, those applications are then passed on to our interview committees, who complete a shortlist for interview. Now, the interviews will begin from the last week of August, and then they will go through the whole month of September. So we start with our postgraduate interviews, and they take place by state. And there's an opportunity to do those either in person or by Skype, but they are in the capital city of each state. So for example, Queensland interviews would take place in Brisbane on a particular date, but if you couldn't make it, if you were abroad or you were not in Brisbane, you could complete that interview by video conferencing. After we do the postgraduates, then we move on to our other categories. So don't be nervous if you don't hear from us at the beginning of August. We try and give at least 2 weeks notice of the time that's been set aside for interviews. And we let our unsuccessfuls know just as quickly as we can, because we understand that people are applying for other grant opportunities as well. So expect to hear back at some stage between mid-August and mid-September whether or not your application has progressed to interview. Now, after the interviews take place, again, there's a whole range of things that take place behind the scenes, but applicants will receive notification. It says by the end of the year, but we generally do this at the beginning of October, because that is often when most other grants notifications come out, which gives people the time and space they need if they were lucky enough to be successful for 2 or 3 different grants. It means that they can select the one that will best suit them. So we will let everyone know, ideally at the very beginning of October, but we say by the end of the year, just in case something happens and the notifications are delayed. So what happens from there? Our successful recipients, we jump straight into some of the planning. And the thing that we do first off the bat is we bring everyone generally to Canberra, which is where our office is based, in February for both an orientation program. And it's one of the best things that we do, because due to the timelines in Australia and the US, we can actually bring all of our Australians who have just been selected and all of our Americans who have just arrived in Australia together for a few days. And whilst we go through all sorts of things that are helpful, whether it's, to explain the process ahead and meet an alumni panel and the rest of it, the best part is that you get to connect with the other 99 Australian scholars and about 40 or 50 Americans. You're all together, and those linkages have proved to be some of the most important that people make. Not only because, by discipline, but also by geographic location. When people travel, they often then go visit and stay with each other. And it's just great to connect with someone who is going through the same sort of thing as you are, so has the same concerns and worries and excitement and all the rest of it. And at the end of the orientation program, we run a gala presentation dinner. So this is when we formally announce to the public about your selection. So we bring together up to 500 of your closest friends, families, members, and strangers, and we do a gala dinner. In the past, we've done this at Parliament House, And it's just a great way to not only, celebrate your achievement, but also link you with Australian and American government representatives, with our different funders, with the different Australian institutions. So we get quite high-level guests across the country who will come and attend this event, and our business and not-for-profit connections and more. So it's a great networking event and just a wonderful way to celebrate your success. Now, after that, we dive straight into the process of getting you abroad, because as you can imagine, there's quite a lot that goes into it. And the earliest that an individual could depart for the US is July of the year following selection. So say, for example, you found out in October 2019 that you were successful. The earliest that you could depart for the US is July 2020. Now, all of our master's or coursework students must start their program in that semester. So in the July 2020 semester is when they would begin their coursework. Our researchers have a little bit more flexibility because they're not bound by the academic year. So our PhD students, our postdocs, our scholar awards and professionals and distinguished chair can commence their program anywhere from July 2020 up to June 2021. So you can really frame this around when suits you best with your professional and your family commitments. Now, just back to the application itself. So here on the application process, you will see what needs to be included. So there are lots of pages that ask just general information, but these are the things that you need to prepare to upload as part of your application. So first and foremost is the project proposal. So this not only tells us what you want to do, and keep in mind that sometimes your application will be being assessed by someone who is not specifically in your discipline. So we recommend limiting any jargon that may not be understood by a wider audience. So you've got a project proposal, and that can be from anywhere from 1 to 2 pages up to 3 to 5 pages. Just have a look at the application instructions. I'll show you where they are so you know the length required. Now, the project proposal, it tells us what you want to do, why it's important, why the US, which is really helpful for us. Why do you need to go to the US to complete this research, and what specifically about the US is helpful? And then the impact of it. So, what will this research achieve, or what are you hoping to achieve? Now, this can be tricky for those who say, well, I also want to apply for the futures, and you're also asking me for a separate impact statement. My suggestion would be that you briefly cover quite broadly what it is that you hope that your project will achieve. For example, you could talk about, well, what will the impact be to the discipline? And then for your futures impact statement, you could talk about what the broader impacts of that could be for when you return to Australia. So project proposal, just make sure and even if you use those headings, there's no set format that it needs to be in, but I would suggest at least breaking it up that way. So what you want to do, why it's important, why the United States, and what the impact of the proposal will be. So that's one document that you'll put together. The second is likely to be much harder to write, and this is your personal statement. So as you know, as we've talked about, the program is not just about the educational or academic exchange, it's about the cultural exchange as well. So we're not just looking for people who have a great project, but we're looking for people who would be great ambassadors for Australia and would be someone who could build long-term linkages and those sorts of things. So your personal statement is not about rehashing your proposal, your project, but it's more about giving us some insight in who the person is behind the research. So it's up to you what you talk about here, but you may want to talk about, was there a moment that sparked your interest in your particular area, or were there some key things in your journey so far that have led you to this point, or it's just your chance to give some insight into who you are. But the worst thing you could do is not include one, which would make the application ineligible. But the second worst thing you could do is just regurgitate the project. So try and think of them as two separate things. The project is what you want to do specifically in the US. The personal statement is who you are. So give them some insight in what you're interested in, what you're passionate about, why you're passionate about it, what led you to this point. It's up to you how you frame that. Alongside that, you'll enter the details of 3 referees. Now, an application is valid if it has at least 2 submitted. So it suggests putting 3 names in there, but you at least need 2. And the great thing about the application is you can see when someone has submitted their referee report. So what happens is you type in you include someone's name and you put in their email address, and then the application system contacts your referee directly so that they can submit a confidential report. Now, people say, well, it'd be great to brief my referee on what to expect. So it will ask your referee a few questions. How do you know the applicant? How long have you known them? And then it will provide space for them to upload a letter of reference. Now, it's up to you how you go about choosing your 3 referees, but I'd suggest some diversity amongst them. If you included your direct supervisor and you included then someone else who you've worked with on a project, they could each talk about different qualities of yours, which gives a bit more of a well-rounded understanding to the selection committees about who you are and your capacity. So it's up to you what you want to do there, but and it's up to you what you ask them to include or not include in part of that reference to try and achieve that well-rounded referee report. But I just suggest the best thing you could do is put people who know you fairly well. So it's it's better and stronger for the selection committee to read something that's a bit more detailed rather than something quite pro forma. So whether it's wonderful to include a senior manager as a referee, but if it's quite just a pro forma kind of letter where it sort of doesn't show that the person actually really knows you and can't comment on you really personally, I'd suggest selecting a different reference. So we're not worried too much about the level of the person that's your referee, but more so what it is that they can share about you. Now, you can still submit say you're done and you've completed everything as part of the application, but your referees still haven't submitted. You can still hit submit, and then your referees can put in their reference reports anywhere up to the submission date. I have a couple of tips about referees. One, ask them first to ensure that they're happy to do it. 2, be sure about what they're going to say. Admittedly, sometimes we'll get a negative referee report. So you want to be sure that you've really picked someone who is actually really supportive of you. And thirdly, once you've entered their details, don't harass them, but certainly let them know that the email has gone through. And because of the security of some university systems, that automatic email from the portal may go to spam. So once you've included them in your application, just check with them, make sure they've received it, make sure the email address you're using is correct and all of those things. Because the worst thing to happen would be if you've spent all this time and energy putting together a really great application, but you just don't have those 2 referee reports that you need. So you can have 3, but you must have at least 2. Now, the other thing you need is a host institution letter of invitation. So again, remember, this is for researchers across all the categories, not for coursework students. And this letter, you can use this. At its baseline, it needs to say that they're happy to host you and they're excited to host you and they're able to. A better thing is if the person writing it can talk about why this research is a common goal and what you hope to achieve together, so it can go into a bit more detail. So again, I'd suggest that you may want to get the letter from, for example, the dean of an institution in the US. But if you're not working directly with the dean and someone at a different level could write something that's a lot more specific, that's really helpful to the selection committee as well. Remember, again, coursework students, you do not need this. You can just bypass this part on the application. And also, all applications will need your academic transcripts, and these need to be complete and certified. So just ensure that you are including, your scanning original documents. In terms of what is it that we're actually looking for, this is a question we get pretty regularly. So while yes, we are looking for academic or professional excellence, you're not ineligible if, for example, in the first year of your undergraduate degree, you flunked a couple of classes. What we're looking for is an upward trajectory. So say, and this is something you could even talk about in your personal statement. So say, for example, you had a difficult time in your undergraduate degree, but then you came back and, circumstances changed. You went into another degree or a postgraduate degree and you've excelled. So we're not looking for straight high distinctions, but if you did struggle, I think it's important to address that, but we are looking for a trajectory. So show us what you have achieved. And this is demonstrated not only in the transcripts that you'll upload, but we can see that in the way that you put together your personal statement as well. And the application will also ask you to upload a resume so we can see what you've done and make sure you really highlight those things that you're proud of. Secondly, we're looking for ambassadorial skills. So this is something that's it's quite unique to the Fulbright program in that we're not just looking for people who will do well in their research and study, but someone who can really represent the Fulbright program and be a great ambassador for Australia. So that, again, is something that you might want to talk about in your personal statement. Have you worked or felt that you were an ambassador in a different context? So have you represented your university abroad? Have you studied abroad and felt like, you were the token Australian and you felt like that you were representing the country? Or, talk about, you could talk about that as in part of your personal statement if you thought that would be helpful. But we're looking for someone who would be a great representative of Australia. And of course, that is wonderfully diverse. But that's the great part of the personal statement, I suppose, is wanting to know someone a little bit more behind the scenes, so behind the research. And that falls into our third point, adaptability. So we want to select people who will be successful, not just in their research, but also personally. Moving to another country is a big move, and we want to ensure that we're setting people up for success. Next, the relevance of a proposed program. So again, this would be covered in your project statement where you talk about why it's important and what it's going to achieve, which again is covered in potential outcomes. Why it's important and the impact is really important to us so we can see the longer term impact of what it is that you want to do. Now, Fulbright Awards are open to Australian citizens only. That's by birth or naturalisation. If you are a dual citizen of any other country that's not the US, you're also eligible. So say, for example, you are an Australian UK citizen, you are certainly eligible. But please, if you are an Australian US citizen, you are not eligible for the program. There is no age limit and open to any field or discipline, and also any suitable host institution. Now, if your host is not an academic one, that's also completely fine, but address in your project statement why you selected that particular host. Now, the Fulbright website is the best place to start because it not only includes a lot more information than I can share with you in a webinar, but there are also FAQs. So all of the questions we get asked pretty regularly are there on that page. Profiles of alumni. We also have webinars like this one, which will talk about how to apply, tips for application and that sort of thing. There are instructions for applying. Now, as I said, there are two different portals. So you've got the postgraduate application and the scholar ones. Now, keep in mind that the application portal is used in 160 different countries, which means that sometimes it'll ask you for something that's just not relevant for Australia. So, for example, other countries might need to include their test scores for their capacity to speak English. We don't need that. And there are a range of things that we do or don't need. So I would suggest, and I'll show you where to get them, when you're filling out your application, have the instructions either on the screen next to the application or printed out in front of you and follow them to a T. Now, our contact details are just at the bottom of that slide there. So the best way to contact us is via email, which is fulbright@fulbright.org.au. And I say that because if you call, we'll often get your email address anyway, because we'll send you links or information in writing, so that way you can refer back to it. So first place to get us is fulbright@fulbright.org.au, and we always try and write back within 24 hours, except of course over the weekend. But if you did need to call, we're available on 02-6260-4460. And there is always someone in the office between 8 and 5. It says 9 to 5 normal business hours, but we often start at 8, so do feel free to call us. Now, I might just jump across to our website so I can show you where things are. So this is the Fulbright website. Again, www.fulbright.org.au, and this is the homepage. Now, in terms of where best to start, my suggestion would be to take a look at scholarships, and you click on the Australian Scholarships tab, and then this page will come up. So this has a search function that you can put in, where you're at so that the relevant scholarships will come up. So say, for example, we wanted to look at the postdoctoral scholarships. You would select, I am a postdoctoral candidate, and just make sure it's selected the Australian flag there rather than the US, because that would be for our awards for Americans. And if you are an Indigenous or Torres Strait Islander applicant, you could also click this box because there are additional opportunities available there. Hit submit, and then the various different awards will come up. So what happens is a lot more awards have come up because it also includes our Indigenous ones. So I might just unselect that box. And then all of the various different awards for postdocs have come up. Now, even though this is a list of 7 or so awards, keep in mind that within most of these, there are multiple awards available. So for example, we talked about the Fulbright Future Scholarships. There could be 15 to 20 awards available just under that banner. Now, a good place to start is the opportunities page, which usually sits at the top. And this will just give you general information that's related to your category. So who can apply, what the entitlements are, what the field of disciplines are, which is generally all fields and disciplines, the budget that we talked about, which will give at least a general understanding. It's provided as a guide only and is subject to change, but I think it's at least helpful to know what the funding may look like, or it's closest to what it will look like. It'll tell you how to apply, and just some great advice there on things to take a look at. And then this box at the bottom is all of the awards that are open to the postdoctoral category. So we talked about the general category, for example. So if I was a postdoc submitting an application, I'm already going to be considered for this. So you can take a look at it to make sure you include everything that you need. You can then elect to be considered for the Fulbright Future Scholarships, but have a look at it because, again, it'll tell you what needs to be included as an additional document, which, as you know, is the impact statement. Then there are some different awards that are separately funded, as in they're co-sponsored between us and, for example, RMIT University. Now, this will tell you what sort of applicant they're looking for in just this little blurb here, and then you can go into it for more information. So for example, RMIT are looking for people across a broad range of fields, and those are mentioned. So you might say, what I want to do is global business. So I can see that not only am I suitable for the general category, it's got great potential impact for when I return to Australia, and I'm also going to ask to be considered for the RMIT award. So you'd have a look and just see if there's anything additional that needs to be included. Again, the same, we have a postdoctoral scholarship funded by Monash University, so you could take a look and see how your project fits in with what they're looking for. The Indigenous scholarship is there as well. And something interesting to note is that this is mostly relevant for our postgraduates, but every state and territory in the country funds an award, and it's one that you can be considered for as well. But specifically ACT, Northern Territory and Tasmania, their state/territory awards are also open to postdocs. Now, what you would need to include as an additional document, you'd follow this link and you would learn that you need to include a statement that talks about how your project is relevant to your home state. So if you were from Tasmania, what benefit would there be to Tasmania for you doing this work? Is it a relevant issue in Tasmania? Is it that you can connect your colleagues in Tasmania with your host institution and more? So just in that there, you could be considered for not just 7 different scholarships, but if there are multiples of those, you could be considered for 30 or 40 within the one application. So the best thing to do is to take a look and be considered for as many as you are eligible for. The worst thing you could do is just tick the box for everything, because we'll quickly see which ones you are and are not eligible for. So say I've taken a look at this, I've jotted down which awards I think I'm suitable for. The next thing to do would be to go to the future applicants page and just make sure I'm ticking all of the boxes more generally. So the Australian applicants page gives you some tips about qualities that we're looking for, things that we've talked about in this webinar about what we're really looking for. You can have, there's links here to our current scholar bios and our alumni pages, so you can see who's been successful in the past. And if there's still some confusion about which category you fit into, just take a look at this box. It'll tell you the timeframes and what sort of applicant we're looking for. And then quite importantly, the eligibility and conditions of the scholarship. So make sure you take a look at this, especially things around citizenship is really important. And also about whether or not you'd be eligible for the J1 visa that we talked about. Make sure you take a look at that, because the Fulbright scholarships are contingent upon the recipient's ability to travel to the US on this particular visa. So have a look at that. Scroll to the bottom, and then, as I mentioned, those frequently asked questions. So there's no problem at all to ever get in touch with us via email, but it's really helpful to us because we get a huge amount of inquiries. Just take a look there and see if your question has been answered, and if it hasn't, get in touch, or if it has but you still have more questions, certainly get in touch, because we're really happy to help you. So say we've checked all of this, we know which scholarships we wanted to apply for, then would come the time to start an application. So I'm just going to jump into any award. So right down the bottom of each of the individual scholarship pages, and you can see this from the future applicants page as well, but anywhere where it says how to apply, there's two things to really keep in mind. One, the instructions, which we talked about. Now, it's through the instructions that you access the application portal itself. So the link is contained in there. And we do that on purpose to make sure that people actually have the application instructions. There's also a checklist, which you need to include as part of your application, which I've not clicked on a very good link. But it's just essentially a way for you to tick the boxes of which scholarships that you want to be considered for. So that way we can tell by reading your application because you've noted it, but then it's confirmed in this checklist. And the checklist also lets you know about any of those additional documents that you may need to include. So what I'm going to do now is click across to the instructions so you can see what they look like. So there are two sets of instructions, and you'll find them depending on which page you access them through. So if you were going through postgraduate pages, you would have opened the postgraduate instructions. I have opened our scholar instructions. So this was for Distinguished Chair, Scholar Awards, Professionals, and Postdoctorals. Now this tells you everything. So it literally goes step by step on how to fill in the application. So as you'll see, that there is the link to the application. Now make sure you're using the right instructions so that you're on the right application portal. So everything from registering an account to get started, how to answer the preliminary questions, where to upload each of your different documents, everything is included in here. And what's super helpful is when there are those fields that you just we do not need, they're not required, we'll let you know that so you can just skip over those. And if you feel nervous about it, as long as you're following these instructions, you're good to go. Because keep in mind, as I mentioned before, this application portal is used in 160 different countries, and each country has their own requirements. But what we need here in Australia is what's covered in this document. So have a look through. It tells you where to put your different documents. There's some tips in here, for example, things about what to include in your project proposal and all the rest of it, right up until hitting the submit button so you can review it and hit submit, but everything will be there. So just make sure you follow these instructions. There's a catalog that's included at the end of the instructions just to make sure that you have seen all of the different opportunities that are available. And again, whether or not there's an additional statement or document that needs to be attached. So as we talked about earlier, that the Fulbright Future Scholarships need the statement about the impact. So that's mentioned here just to be sure that everyone has seen it. This is the checklist that I unsuccessfully tried to access just before. So again, this tells us all of the different awards that you are hoping to apply for. Just make sure you're eligible. So please just don't tick all the boxes. Make sure you've actually had a real look at it and you are actually eligible for the ones that you're ticking the box for. So we not only ask for that, but we get you to just sign off saying that you have checked your eligibility. And some of these, it's just really a prompt to make sure that it doesn't get forgotten along the way. So these are the instructions. So really recommend that you read these in full. I'd suggest taking a look at it before you start the actual application so that you know what you need. But all of those statements that we talked about, the personal statement, the project statement, all of that are separate documents that you'll upload. So feel free just to click your way through the application, look at the instructions, make sure you've got a really clear idea about what you need, and start early. You don't want to be, there are always a few that are submitting their applications at 11:58 on the deadline day. It's so much nicer to know that you have prepared in advance and you've submitted the best version of the documents that you possibly can. And really a reminder is if you're looking at this right now and you don't yet have a host in mind for researchers, start looking as soon as you can, start connecting with people and don't be afraid to do it, and start talking to your references. Let them know that you're going to be looking to apply, so that way they're prepared and you know who you've got and they're good to go. Have a look through our website. Again, that information is it's designed to be comprehensive, so please have a look there and see if there's anything there that will be helpful. And start early. Reach out to your research office. There are so many research offices that are happy to help, whether that's reviewing your application for you before you submit or doing a mock interview and more. Just see what's available and don't be afraid. I think so many people get nervous about applying for an opportunity like this because they're afraid that they might fail, but the worst thing that you could do is not throw your hat in the ring. Each year when we have our orientation program, everyone in the room says that they couldn't believe that they were successful. So no one went into a Fulbright application assuming success, and so many of them are wonderfully surprised when they are told that they're successful. So throw your hat in the ring, really give it a go. The program's designed to be accessible and diverse and across all disciplines and people from each institution and across all states and territories. So really give it a go. And if you have any questions or you want some support, please get in touch with us because we'd love to help you, and we'd love the chance to meet you. So take a look, and again, get in touch if there's anything else that we can do. Thanks again for listening, and please check back on the website to see future webinars. And again, get in touch if you need us. Thanks so much.